Yesterday, Ottawa was the center of attention for the whole country as the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister detonated herself just hours before the fall economic update, sort of a mini budget, an update on the budget. Her political machinations stole the spotlight and led to cabinet shuffles and even a comment by Donald Trump, who seems to side with Justin Trudeau ahead of Chrystia Freeland, who he called toxic. I think he's just poking around with what he calls Governor Justin Trudeau. The whole country was talking about politics and will Trudeau resign and will Jagmeet Singh continue to support him? But lost in the shuffle was the budget update itself, an astonishing $62 billion deficit. What else is in there? Who's minding the store while the Liberals fight amongst themselves? Joining us now to talk about this is, you know who, our trustworthy friends because they don't take any government money. I'm talking about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and their outstanding leader, Franco Terrazzano. Franco, great to see you. I know, like all of us, you were focused on the political intrigues, but you also looked at the actual budgetary documents themselves. Tell us that story, because we already heard the politics. What's in the numbers?
Well, just when you think Justin Trudeau's budget couldn't get any worse, he proves you wrong. And I'm glad we're actually talking about the numbers, the dollars and cents, because this budget update was a disaster. So all year, you had Trudeau and company saying they won't exceed their fiscal guardrail of $40 billion deficit. In and of itself, that's insane, a $40 billion deficit. Then what do we learn from the budget update? We learned that Trudeau drove through his own fiscal guardrail by more than $20 billion. So he ran a $62 billion deficit last year, which is nuts.
How? How did he do it? I mean, I can guess, but you tell me. Was it, like, what did he spend it on, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, look, I can tell you what the government claims, and let's poke some holes through it, right? The government claims that there is some one-time expenses that nobody could have foresaw, which is why the budget blew through the guardrail of $40 billion to $62 billion. But like none of that even passes the slightest sniff test. So number one, even without those unexpected expenses, well, they still would have blown past the $40 billion deficit. Number two, this year's deficit is supposed to be about $48 billion. So even without those one-time expenses this year, they're breaking the fiscal guardrail. Number three, Ezra, as you are well aware of, this isn't the first time that Trudeau has blown through a budget target. You'll remember all the way back in 2015, he promised these tiny little baby deficits of less than $10 billion and a balanced budget by 2019. Well, of course, we now know today that Trudeau missed that balanced budget by $20 billion in 2019. But more to the point, Ezra, like what happens when a one-time expense comes up for any prudent family or business? Well, you cut back spending elsewhere to deal with that issue. But that's not what's going on with Trudeau. They're spending like drunken sailors on so many different things that they should be able to find savings in every single area of their budget.
Can you give me an example of one of these so-called one-time unexpected expenses? I mean, they have entire office buildings full of economists and bureaucrats and people studying and calculating. The idea that they just have a whoopsie of $20 billion is unacceptable and unbelievable. But what are they pointing to as an excuse? Like, it sounds like the Great Train Robbery or some sort of heist.
Yeah, well, so I have to be upfront. Like, I'm not a lawyer, so this one's a little bit difficult. But the biggest expense, the bulk of it, had to do with some legal issues over Indigenous expenses. Like that was the big ticket item that the budget update pointed to. But, you know, even if you take that for granted, we already kind of poked through those holes of the government's claims in the previous Q&A, right? Mm-hmm. In the sense that even if you remove that big ticket spending expense that they couldn't have foreseen, $48 billion.
Yeah.
There's still $48 billion deficit this year.
You know, it's madness. And I just don't get it. I heard, now let me move into the realm of political gossip, because I heard that, of course, Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor, former Bank of England governor, big shot at the World Economic Forum, big shot at the end, like the ultimate globalist. I heard he was considering taking the position. I know Trudeau made him the special advisor for the economy. From what I heard, he's sort of backing away from this bonfire. Yeah. I mean, whoever takes over, and it's Dominic LeBlanc, pretty much the only grown-up in cabinet, I think we can all say. This is just thrown on top of him, along with, public security portfolio. He's got about half a dozen things because in her own way, Chrystia Freeland, even though she did a disastrous job, she was sort of the jack of all trades for Trudeau. So it's all on Dominic LeBlanc. There's no way one person can do this. I don't know if I suppose they're going to go into an election before too long anyways. But if you were Mark Carney, or if you were someone who was tasked with being the finance minister, put aside politics, how would you even go about getting out of this mess? Like, let's say you were Donald Trump, a corporate turnaround artist, or let's say you were Elon Musk, a get-her-done entrepreneur. What would a radical approach look like to try and fix this insane budget? Because it is unsustainable. It's going to sink us.
Well, it is unsustainable, right? Like right now, interest charges on the debt are costing taxpayers more than $1 billion every single week, right? I mean, look, like in Canada, you pay a federal sales tax to cover interest charges on Trudeau's government credit card, right? That's how bad things are. And you kind of asked if I was Trump or Elon Musk or whatever. Well, you got to kind of look at what Trump and Musk are doing. The Department of Government Efficiency. Right? We don't need a newly created government department in Ottawa per se, but the mandate of DOGE in the US should be followed in Canada. So number one, start with the little things. I don't know, don't spend millions of dollars on government podcasts that nobody listens to. Don't spend $8 million building a barn. Don't spend more money on food in 4 days when you go over to Europe than what the average family spends on food in 4 years. Then you got to do the big thing. Right? And the big thing is dismantling the bureaucracy. Trudeau has added 108,000 extra government bureaucrats in less than a decade. He has ballooned the cost of the federal bureaucracy by 73% in less than a decade. You have to cut the number of government employees. Then you have to end corporate welfare. Ezra, cut taxes, don't hand corporate welfare to multinational corporations. And then you have to do some other stuff too, right? Like getting out of the business of business. Defund the CBC. The government doesn't need a state broadcaster. Privatize the Canada Post, right? Why do we own a postal service? Like it's the year 2024, almost 2025. Sell via rail. Right? That Crown Corporation loses hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. That is just a taste of some of the reforms that we need here in Canada.
You know what? We need a DOGE, a Department of Governmental Efficiency. And I would hope that the next prime minister appoints you, Franco, because you've got a nose for this stuff, for digging around. Can I share with you two contrasting things that happened in the last 24 hours?
Yeah.
Our dollar hit 69 cents briefly. I think it's back above 70 cents. It's around the lowest in years. That's the world sort of giving their appraisal of the health of our entire economy. And at the same time, and I mentioned this the other day, the president of the Japanese huge investment fund called SoftBank goes to Mar-a-Lago, has a handshake with Donald Trump, and announces he's going to invest $100 billion in the American economy with an aim of creating 100,000 jobs. Obviously, he's not interested in the jobs per se. He's interested in the rate of return in the company. None of that is government money, Franco. None of that is a taxpayer grant to some electric battery scheme that Trudeau cooked up. The difference between investment, as the way the Canadian government uses it, which means take taxpayers' money to give to some crony, versus attracting on your own merits a $100 billion investment, it couldn't be clearer. And I just wish we would choose the path of Trump or Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina. I don't know if you saw, inflation is now completely broken, and he turned a surplus for the first time in a generation. If you can turn around Argentina, Franco, you can turn around Canada, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, like the bad news, we don't have to keep reiterating, right? We talk about it all the time, and there's so much bad news coming from this government in Ottawa for taxpayers. The good news is that Canada is not too far gone, not even close, right? And we're not even close. Like the market is so powerful. Canadians, like, let's put this into perspective here. Let's think bigger picture. Canada can and should be the most free and most prosperous country in the world. We have abundant natural resources, diverse natural resources all throughout Canada. We have a very skilled and educated workforce, and we are situated right beside the world's largest economy. There is no reason outside of what our governments are doing to us that Canada should not be the freest and most prosperous country in the world. And we can be. All we need to do, and yes, it is this simple, is cut down the size and scope of government. The government regulates too much, it taxes too much, and speaking of inflation, the central bank in Canada, the Bank of Canada, prints way too much.
Yeah.